Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to Doctor's Couch. Today we are having an interesting topic and a very serious topic that needs attention, that is least talked about, and that's one of the important topics that we as Muslims facing in American society. The topic is domestic abuse and domestic violence, especially in the North American Muslims. To discuss this, I have two experts with me. Welcome, both of you. If I may start with you, sister. As a professional, you do it day in and out. How do you define what domestic abuse is? What is domestic violence? Is it the same thing, or one leads to the other?
So domestic violence and domestic abuse are interchangeable. They're the same thing, but there is a difference between domestic violence and interpersonal violence, or IPV. So when we look at like domestic abuse or domestic violence, that's the broad umbrella. That could be abuse between like a parent and a child, an in-law with like the daughter-in-law or the mother-in-law. IPV is the more of the violence that occurs between the husband and the wife, right? So it's the one that happens between the two partners. So there's a differentiation there, and it's defined in many ways. So there is the traditional sense, which is the physical violence, but there are other broader aspects of it. So there's physical, there's verbal, there's psychological, emotional, and actually it's kind of been expanded even more to spiritual abuse, financial abuse. There's also immigrational abuse. So I know we have the traditional of like, he hits, that's it, or she hits and that's it, right? That's the abuse. But there's a lot of other stuff that goes around it, that usually physical abuse is the last step.
Got it. So usually when we hear domestic abuse or domestic violence, is mostly the physical part that comes into play.
Yeah.
But it's very enlightening to know that there is emotional and all the different types of abuses that you mentioned. If you can switch to Imam Nadim Bashir, especially from the perspective of religion and Islam, what take Islam has on domestic violence or domestic abuse? And if I may add the second part of the question, are men and women considered equal in Islam?
So the very first thing is that I want to make this clear for the record that I'm not an expert. I mean, Sister Madhiya is, from an academic perspective, she is the expert here on these kind of matters. But as far as the first question is concerned about domestic abuse or any kind of abuse, whether it is emotional abuse, psychological abuse, based on the practices that I have been, working with and just working with other families and cases that have been coming to us through mediation, arbitration, there's even financial abuse. So strictly from an Islamic perspective, any kind of abuse, any kind of dhulm is prohibited in Islam. And often what happens in any of these kind of abuses is that there's always one person who is using a certain matter or a certain thing to gain power over the other person. And subhanAllah, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was a very beautiful incident that is a reminder for every person who ever tries to feel that because of my position and because of my authority, I can gain advantage over anyone else. There was a person by the name of Abu Mas'ud, not Ibn Mas'ud, but Abu Mas'ud radiallahu anh, where that he basically hit one of his servants. And the Prophet ﷺ was standing behind there, and he called out his name in a very harsh way. Like he could say, Abu Mas'ud, but he said like a little harshly, he goes, Abu Mas'ud. Like anyone hearing that could get, their attention is caught immediately. And then he says that he never even asked him that, why did you even do this? He was not even looking for an explanation. But he said that you did this to him because you felt that you had power over him. Always remind yourself that there is someone who has more power than you. There is someone above you in terms of power. So I think that this is a reminder for any type of abuse that it's always a common and consistent theme that there's one person who feels that they have something that they can overpower the other person, and they use that to exploit the other person. And this in our deen at all cost is prohibited. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Hadith Qudsi, He says, Ya ibadi inni haramtu dhulma ala nafsi wa ja'altuhu baynakum muharraman fala tadhalimu. That I have made dhulm and oppression haram upon myself, and I've made it haram upon everyone else. So any kind of oppression, any kind of abuse from any party towards anyone else is prohibited. In this complete picture within our deen. As far as your second question is concerned, are men and women equal? To be honest, this was not really a question that was very common a long time ago. I think that in the last, probably 20, 30 years is starting to become a question, and it has ramped up and gained a lot of attention. First of all is that we have to really ask ourselves that what matters most to Allah? What matters most to Allah is our spirituality. This dunya has absolutely no value in the eyes of Allah. So strictly from a spiritual perspective, it is very clear that men and women are equal in that sense. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has leveled the playing field when it comes to spirituality. And this is why we will find that in the Quran, when even there were some women who came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said that, what about us? Allah says, and this is a very well-known verse in Surah Al-Ahzab, a very long verse, إِنَّ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَالْمُسْلِمَاتِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about certain characteristics, but He used the noun form for both men and women. He mentioned that very clearly. So in terms of spirituality, the playing field has been leveled. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the Quran, وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. The men are not equal to, are not like women. I mean, even when we talk about even men within our own gender, not all men are equal. Okay, you have a certain specialty that I don't. So in terms of that specialty, you and I are not even equal. So if people of one gender cannot be equal, then how can people who coming from two different genders, how can they be equal to one another? So when it comes to skill sets, we're all are going to be different from each other. And there are, universally speaking, we have seen that there are some skill sets that you see that both men and women have flooded the market. Whether it's medicine, whether it's psychology, whether it's architecture, design, you will see, when it comes to food, and you will see both men and women in there. However, there are going to be some areas of our society where men have dominated that area, such as construction, such as infrastructure. When you talk about working in the oil fields, the oil rigs, you're going to find men dominating that area. Does it mean that the women don't have the capacity? That doesn't mean that. And I think that a lot of times society has overblown these kind of issues, unfortunately. And what it has created is a very big division within the community. It has created so much war between men and women, whereas I personally believe that we need to all understand and respect our strengths and take our Muslim community to the next level. Right.
So probably it's not the right question to ask or to compare the equal part for both men and women. Each one comes with a different set of skills and talent.
Absolutely.
And everyone is so unique that it has to be like individually. No, definitely agree on that. As some non-Muslim friends, they come up with questions who doesn't have a complete understanding of Islam about the rights of men that they can divorce, whereas women who can just take a separation. So probably I think it's also kind of, you already answered that question, that, again, God gave everybody a certain gift, certain set of qualities. So Sister Madhiya, if I can switch to you.
Yeah.
So if you look at different countries, different societies around the globe, especially in the East and Africa, it's kind of like a predominantly kind of male dominant, if I may call, right? But in the West, especially in America, our society is kind of equally balanced in terms of kind of the gender domination, if I come to be more precise. Though some claim is kind of more favoring the female population, especially the women's rights and the protection by the law and other stuff. So my question is, does culture play a role in perpetuating the domestic abuse which will lead to violence?
So I think there is a, I think it's, it's easy to label the East as this like conservative backwards culture where it's like women are at home and men are at, work and hold a lot of the power. I would argue the opposite. I think that in the East, the division of labor is clearly understood and everyone knows their roles a little bit better. So I think, whereas over there, the women are, kind of understood to be the homemakers and they understand their role. And even if they work outside, they do have, like, in Pakistan, India, you have the Masjid or the help and all of that stuff that kind of help you kind of raise the family, keep the home together. And then you have the joint family system where you have, the extended family that are also helping and, contributing to the home, right? So the idea is over in the Eastern cultures, if the woman chooses to work, she still has support at home to help her do the work, so she's not doing full-time job and full-time homemaking, right? And I think that division and that role is more clearly stated. I think in the East where we get those, the media and the way they kind of portray us over there as these backwards people is when, again, like Imam Nadim so well clearly stated earlier, is when one individual in the marriage takes power and authority and uses that against another person in the marriage, right? So if the woman, for example, does not have a family, let's say her parents have passed away and she doesn't have any male figures that can help her, she's kind of stuck in that marriage, right? If it's bad and she has no education, how she's gonna earn, right? And the idea is if the man says, I'm not gonna pay for you, I'm not gonna, support you once you're divorced, I'm gonna take the kids away from you, right? You have nobody to go to, what does she do except stay in that marriage? Because at that point, her survival is being questioned, right?
So it's a misuse and exploitation of the situation.
It's an exploitation of the weakness. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's where you identify a weakness and then you're going to exploit that weakness.
Yeah.
And they're really good at that. Whoever does it, I mean, they know what they're doing very clearly.
Yeah. And I think in the East and the West, did you guys see the Barbie movie? The one that came out like 2 years ago. Did you see it, Dr. Rahman? No. Okay. So in the Barbie movie, right, there's this scene where Ryan Gosling, right, he leaves the Barbie world and he goes into the real world. And in the Barbie world, think of it's the opposite. Like the women are in charge, they're the president, they're the ones doing all of that, and the men are more of like the traditional women that we see here. So he comes into the real world and he goes to this area, it's like called Millennium Park or whatever, and it's like this, like think like finance bros, right? So it's all the like toxic masculinity type people that are there, the high achievers. And he goes, what is this, right? He's like, well, this is patriarchy, right? And they're like, I thought patriarchy was dead. And the guy goes, patriarchy isn't dead, we just learned to hide it better, right? So the idea here is just because in the West we like to proclaim that we're all about equality and women's rights, it's not that way, right? Women still earn less than men do, right? I argue women burnout rate is higher because even though women are now working, they're still expected to also complete the traditional roles in the homes. So you're actually working as a full-time homemaker and a full-time, income earner, but then you're still expected to contribute 50-50, right? And what is that 50-50? It's the money, right? But when it comes to the household chores, sometimes the men don't pick up their side, right? And again, this is the generalization, because I have seen homes where it works out well, right? And when we talk about that 50-50 model, which is like we both earn, we both contribute to the pot, but we also contribute to the household chores and raising the children, right? And that's when it becomes a healthy balance. And again, Islam shows us that too, right? So it is men, men have the responsibility to earn and provide for their household, just like women have the responsibility of, raising the children, but that doesn't mean men have no responsibility in raising the children, and women can't contribute to the household if needed, right? So the idea here is that there are division of roles within our religion, but it's the exploitation of those roles, and then, the pushing of like, well, you want to work, sure, but you also have to do this, and you have to also do that, and kind of manipulating the spiritual aspect of it to kind of enforce that control and dominance on another person.
Got it. So is it accurate to say that West has very intelligently exploited
I think we've just gotten
the
smarter.
women's right, under the pretext of women's right, women's liberation, kind of put more pressure on the women. Now you have to go out and make a living, along with, as you mentioned,
Exactly.
doing the household chores.
So when I see, like, for example, when I see women in my practice who come to me and they're in these similar situations, right? The husband is very rarely hitting her, right? Or if it's a man, the woman isn't hitting him. It's like she's attacking his psyche, right? You're not good enough, you don't earn enough. My so-and-so friend's husband bought her this car or this thing and they live in this home. You're not good for anything, right? I'm not happy with you. So she attacks his psyche. With the men, it's, oh, you want to go to Pakistan to see your family? I can't afford that. If you want to go, you have to earn. Ask your brother, ask your dad to send you money. I can't, right?
Is that considered a psychological abuse?
So when we talk about what is the abuse aspect of it, it is the continuation of a certain thing meant to attack and hurt the other person, right? So in another word, it's what are your triggers? And am I purposely attacking you where your triggers are? Am I purposely attacking you knowing that it's going to inflict damage? And if I continuously do it over time, it breaks that person down, right? So I always tell people a rock, as hard as it, as strong and as solid as it may be, if I apply enough pressure to a rock, it's gonna crumble, right? So no matter how strong your self-esteem or your self-confidence may be, a continuous hit over time breaks a person down.
Coming to my next question, Imam Nadim Bashir, again, I always kind of love to look back into the history. So it's kind of a historical question too. Over a period in history, we kind of read about various civilizations. It doesn't have to be Islamic. Some were female dominant, but many were male dominant, again, if you have to accept. And a classic example is a pre-Islamic society, right, where we see kind of it like purely male dominant. And if you go to the extreme example, right, the live burial of daughters or the females, and then Islam came, it gave rise to women. But in the Revelation, the Surah Nisa, chapter 4, verse 34, as the later half of the verse says, if you sense ill conduct from a woman, advise them, then separate your bed, and lastly, beat them lightly. Most situations, due to the heat of the moment or however you would like to say, people might skip the beginning of the sentence and just implement the last part, which is the physical action. And many, including media, have kind of exploited and overrepresented the sentence. So if violence is discouraged, as you said, is this word kind of misunderstood, or people are applying differently in a practical way?
Coming to your question about this verse of Surah An-Nisa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse, He begins the verse by talking about what are the responsibilities of a man and what are the responsibilities of a woman. And I, Sister Madhiya earlier on, you were talking about like the responsibilities of the man and the balance of the man and the woman in the house and so forth. And that is, I think that's a discussion, that's a lengthy discussion, to be honest, because there's a lot of misunderstandings. And I will just say about that issue that when it comes to internal family issues and balances, I think that there's just so much information and there's just so much cultural infusion that you're trying to maintain your culture, you're trying to maintain society, you're trying to maintain your Islam, and people get so caught up in all this that they have absolutely no idea how to even Islamically establish a certain balance within the family. Because even if a woman is going to go and work, there are some certain rules in place for that, you understand? But majority of our society and our community members are just simply unaware of those. So that's a discussion for another day. But coming back to your then question about this ayah and how people can misinterpret this ayah, first of all is that there's one part of this verse that Allah says, وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ, that those women that you are fearing from them, or you are afraid that they will indulge in nushuz. And just like within like the subcontinent culture, we have this, this idea that many times if the woman does not do anything that you want her to do, then she's considered as, non-shukra and all that kind of stuff. We have these terminologies that we use a lot of times in our families, right? Well, the word nushuz, especially within many of the Arab families, This is the word that they often use in their Arab family. It's
You mean not grateful to...
No, it's actually the word nushuz is often used as nashes. So, like for example, as I said, in the subcontinent families, they use the word nashukra.
Okay.
They use a lot of other words that are not coming to my mind right now. But in the Arab families, they use the word nashes. So, like if the woman does not do whatever the husband was, oh, she's a nashes. She's a nashes. This is something that I've heard from many families, and so the question is that what does actually nushuz mean? And you really have to go back and ask yourself that nushuz or nashes does not mean that you don't do whatever I tell you to do. The Quran is saying that what do you fear from them? Like what does a man fear the most from his wife? That she will be belligerent towards him. You understand? She will go out in society and she'll be promiscuous, for example. Okay, she is showing herself off more than to her husband. She's showing herself off to strangers more. A woman who goes and she has no haya. You understand? This is what nushuz means, actually.
So all those extreme scenarios.
Yes. So the Quran is saying that if you see that your wife is going to those extreme levels of just being belligerent, disrespectful, have absolutely no regard. See, one is that husband and wife can be upset with each other, they're just avoiding each other. But one is where a woman becomes like extremely out of hand. And so, like for example, Sister Madhiya was mentioning earlier that, and when you talk about like emotional abuse in families, right? You have the husband who can make the wife feel like she's absolutely worthless. That is emotional abuse. But you find also women doing that to the men a lot of times, as Sister she was saying earlier. Yeah, women doing more. And I will say this, that I think that in a marriage, and I read this somewhere or I heard this somewhere, in a marriage, for a man, the greatest challenge is to control the thing that Allah has given him, which is his physical strength. For a man, that's his greatest challenge. And for a woman, her greatest challenge is to not emotionally put down her man. You understand? Like, they have this ability at times to like use their tongue in a wrong way to emotionally and psychologically emasculate the man, that he feels like he's absolutely worthless. You understand? For a woman, that is her greatest challenge, to control her tongue. And for a man, his greatest challenge is to control his physical abilities. And so the Quran is saying that when a man gets to that point where the wife is doing all these kind of things, then you take these steps. Okay, the very first one is فَعِظُوهُنَّ. And فَعِظُوهُنَّ comes to the word wa'ala ya'idu in the Arabic language, which means that you give like a very sincere and very loving advice. Like when Luqman was giving advice to his son, the same word has been used there too. That وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ. The same words there, by the way. How did Luqman talk to his son in such a loving, Ya bunayya, like my son, mera beta, like there's so much love. The Quran is saying use that same kind of love when you're talking to your spouse. That's the very first step. Then the second step is that you separate from their beds, because women take that very hard upon themselves when a man is physically distancing themselves. Because the first thing that comes to the mind of a woman is, if he is distancing himself physically from me, then he's probably fulfilling his physical needs somewhere else. That's the first thing that comes to a woman's mind. And then the Quran does say وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ. Now, to be honest, I was looking into this more and more, and وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ does not necessarily mean hit them the way people understand as hitting. Because we find in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that he never ever struck anyone.
Not physically.
Physically, he never struck anyone. He never touched his wives. He never struck anyone, not even a slave of his own. I mean, you have a case like Zayd ibn Haritha, who chose to remain as a slave with the Prophet ﷺ over his freedom, because how well, the mannerisms of the Prophet ﷺ.
Right.
So the point is that this is not what we understand it to be. وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ also is that if there is no khair that will come out of this, then this is not an option that is ordained upon the Muslim that you must go down this road. Because look, at the end of the day, if a man sees that his wife is completely out of control, he's going to try to take certain steps. What is the objective to take all these steps? To make the situation better.
Right.
So if you're going to take any of these steps and it can backfire on you, then you simply can stay away from those steps. You understand? If a person says, well, I'm going to give her advice, and the advice does not work, and a man says, well, you know what, I don't even want to go down the road of separating myself from her, and then he can say, okay, you know what, I think that this marriage is not going to work out. Just because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran does not mean that you have to necessarily go through those steps.
Right.
And then finally, I mean, some people are going to say that if you look at the words, if you look at the nature of the Prophet, he never hit anyone, he never touched his wives in an abusive way. But then, like for example, if a man wants to take certain action and he sees that there can be some khair that will come out of it, then, you know, like for example, we might, you know, a man may even just go and just grab his wife like this, like, you know, come on, like snap out of this. You know, just shake her up a bit. You know, in my understanding, that could be like وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ. You understand? Like just shake her up a little. But to physically harm her, physically assault her is nowhere in our deen. And I mean, this is a discussion for another day, but I think that even in a situation like this, any person who gets abused, when there's constant abuse that takes place, a lot of times, especially within our cultures, many people believe that this is part of who I am, like I am deserving of it. Like they begin to criticize themselves, or they begin to blame themselves that I'm probably worthy of this. Like there are a lot of women in like, especially in our subcontinent culture, because there's less, you know, law and order over there in those countries, that a lot of women feel that I am a woman, so this is part of this is part of the routine.
So losing self-confidence and kind of accepting to
that is a major problem. Yeah.
So like what you're describing, that the ayah, right, and the use of that ayah and how people, that's spiritual abuse, right? So I'm taking something that Islam is saying out of context, and then I'm using that as a validation for my actions, right? And that's a lot of times what happens. Now, if you look at, like he's talking about countries back home, a lot of women, even though we live in Islamic countries, they don't have the Islamic education. If you've ever gone to Umrah or Hajj and you see people who come from like Afghanistan or Pakistan or Africa, they don't know how to do khutbah, right? They don't know how to do Jummah Salah because they've never attended Jummah Salah before. So for us, when we go and we have the ability to, you know, understand what's going on, people don't even have that knowledge. So the idea is, if I have a woman or even a man who doesn't have the knowledge, and rather whatever knowledge of Islam that they do have is told to them by a parent or shown to them by their surroundings, that is the knowledge that they're applying.
Yeah,
right?
No, I agree with that. Again, unfortunately, the half knowledge that reaches and the way emotions work and the media portrays and the society and culture influence.
I mean, I think it's cultural infusion, but there's a lot of ignorance in the culture. There's an immense amount of ignorance, and the thing is that when you sit down and you start educating people, that is when they begin to realize, and you will see that there are a lot of people here within America who came from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Middle Eastern countries, and they learned Islam more here than overseas, because here there's been so much of a focus on educating people about people's rights, what is right, what is actually wrong, that now they begin to realize, and you know, whatever is in the Quran, it becomes more clear to them. Whereas overseas, though they are Muslim countries, I strongly believe that there's more of an infusion of culture than religion in their lives.
Yeah. I think that's where the identity crisis comes in. That we don't know where the culture ends and Islam begins, or
well, they've
versa.
They've been taught that whatever the culture is, this is what Islam is. So they actually lose faith in Islam. They actually lose their confidence in Islam. Whereas, if you look at the world and you study Islam, wallahi, there is no balance system more better than Islam. Islam has the greatest balance system. But because they've not been taught, or they've been misinformed that this is what religion is. What you see is what religion is. Whereas that's not the reality. There's actually more culture than religion. There might be 80% culture and 20% Islam, but they've been taught that this is what Islam is.
Yeah.
And that's why they lose confidence in their deen.
What you're describing is what we call a third culture crisis, right? And it's children. So for example, like for me, I was born and raised in Dallas, right here in America. So there's the American identity paired with the Muslim identity, and my parents are Pakistani. So there's the Pakistani identity, right? So you're trying to navigate these three cultures and identify who you are and what fit and matches to your beliefs, right? While simultaneously trying to please everyone in your life as well, right?
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of the third culture crisis that we talk about, because at the end of the day, someone here is telling, like, my mom is saying this is right, my Imam Nadim's over here like, that's not right, like, don't do that, like, that's not Islam, right? But then America's like, that's not right at all, right? So like, there's a whole other like slew of like what is right and wrong, and then how does that affect me and who am I from that?
Yeah, so it seems like a constant struggle, right? And again, I
mentioned this earlier. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just people are struggling just to like where, like, there's so many directions to go into.
Because we as humans,
I have to please everyone. I got to keep everyone happy, and so that is a struggle of today many Muslims.
So, I mean, to be human, right, we like to be put into boxes. We like our labels, right? Because labels are something that we can define, and labels are our comfort, right? So if I can say I am this label, this label, this label, then I find comfort in that, and I find acceptance in that, right? And that's the issue, is that sometimes doing the right thing is doing the hard thing.
Right, that's correct.
And that's what people struggle with is, yeah, I can continue to conform to these societal, standards. I can continue to conform to what my mom and dad say, right? So like when we talk about abuse, what we don't understand is an abuser was often the abusee, right? And it is a cycle that we continue to see generation after generation after generation. And until we use, knowledge, until we seek that knowledge, until we choose to say this isn't right, and we do the hard thing, which is step out of what we know and do something that's unknown and uncomfortable, but it is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
That is until we change that cycle and break that cycle.
So from your clinical experience, like talking to, I think, n number of clients or patients, I would say, what are some of the red flags that needs to be monitored so it doesn't escalate into abuse or violence? Like, what do you see most often? Like, what are the red flags in the relationship early on?
So I think one of the biggest things is recognizing love bombing. Okay, I think a lot of times people don't recognize what love bombing is and what that looks like, but what it is essentially is this over-the-top theatrical type behavior from the opposite partner. So
is that some new term, love bombing?
Yeah, so it's essentially like where you basically confuse the person by giving them all the positives, right? So like you show up with flowers and presents and gifts, and you give them constant communication, right? So it's like we call them the good morning text. So the moment you wake up, there's a good morning from the partner, right? And they're telling you how wonderful you are and how beautiful you are, how handsome you are, and they're constantly building you up and making you feel like you are the most amazing person in the world. Like, I don't know who I was before I met you. Where have you been my whole? These like types of things that you hear, that's love bombing. Because then what they do is they give you all of this dopamine, right? It's like a heroin rush, right? Mm-hmm. They give it to you, so now you're hooked. Because even if you're like smart about it, you're like, bro, like what's going on? Like you met me yesterday. What do you mean you can't live without me, right? That feels weird.
Right.
But you like kind of like, okay, just feed into it, and then all of a sudden they withdraw it. And then it's like...
And then they're running after them then.
Yeah, and then now you're doing the chasing, right? So you're using that love bombing, or you're using what we are, taught to say, hey, this person's showing interest in you. Wait, they said that? That means they like you, right? And they use that and they weaponize that. And then they withdraw, right? So it's like I'm giving you heroin and then I take the heroin away, right? So the idea is that dopamine rush is now withdrawn, right? And then from there, what they usually do is the emotional manipulation and self-victimization. So what they do is then they tell you about their own trauma and how mistreated they were throughout their lives, and how everyone, whether it was a parent or a spouse or a romantic partner or a friend or a cousin or whoever, mistreated them or misused them, whatever their, or origin story is. So now when they act in a negative way, when they act in a way where you're like, you're not supposed to talk to me like that, you can't touch me like that, you can't treat me like that, you feel the empathy for them because, yeah, but his dad used to do that to his mom, or her mom used to get that from her dad. That's why she knows this. That's why she does this, right? And the idea is now you're feeling empathy for that person. And rather looking at this person as a grown adult who is consciously making these decisions, we're looking at the scared child who had to go through that their whole life, right? So the love bombing paired with the victimization is some major red flags that you have to keep out for. Butterflies in the stomach. Sometimes you talk to somebody you like and you get those like little butterflies in the stomach. That's an anxiety-based response. Your body's telling you to run. When you feel safe, you don't get butterflies. You feel secure, you feel good, you feel comfortable in your area. You're not overly conscious. You're not like constantly fidgeting and feeling like, oh my God, what is he looking at? What is she looking at? Like, what is she thinking? That's all anxiety. And at its core, anxiety is a defense mechanism. It's a survival instinct that was put into us to protect us back when we were living in the wild and we were living in these caves. Anxiety is what told us, hey, run, danger's here, danger's here.
Right.
So the butterflies in our stomach are often misconstrued or misunderstood as, oh my God, I like him. But the reality is, no, your body's telling you, your gut feeling is telling you this isn't right. Run.
So kind of infatuation, right? But in the context of marriage, right? So at what stage in marriage can we anticipate these changes?
It depends on how you meet the person, right? So nowadays, a lot of people are on the apps. On the apps, it's very easy to tell if you know what you're looking for, I guess.
Right.
Right?
You set
Which is not majority of the people, but
if you know what you're looking for. So if a guy is like 100, like for me, my biggest flag is whenever they start off with "Salam, beautiful." That is like the biggest thing for me. Like, ew, stop, like go away, right?
So complimenting too early.
Too early, or like too aggressively, or too frequently, right? There is a way to compliment somebody
in a respectful way.
but in a respectful way, right? But what they do is that's the only thing that's the only thing they do. Is every other word is a compliment you, or you're talking about a serious topic, and all of a sudden they're like, you just have the most beautiful smile, and it's like, okay, but we were talking about this, like what's going on, right? So it's kind of this like constant redirection, and it's almost like you have whiplash. You're just trying to keep up with their energy, and then they stop, right? And then there's when the ghosting phase comes in, and then they come back again. When you think like they go a week without talking to you, and then they come back again, and then they got you on that hook again, right? Oh, I'm so sorry, I was so busy this past week, this and this happened. And then they talk to you consistently for about 3 days, and then ghost.
Got it.
Right?
Got it.
So when you are looking as a person, whether you are a male or a female, right? Pay attention to these kind of signs where it's over the top communication, where it is, non-frequent communication, or inconsistent communication is what I would say. And then the other aspect of it is the love bombing aspect of it, right? Then there's gaslighting. What they essentially do is they will tell you they did something, and then a few days later they completely switch the story. And then you're like, wait, but you said that. They're like, no, you didn't hear me right. This is what I said. No, that's not what no, dude, what are you doing? This is what I meant. What are you doing, right? So it's like you're now questioning, like, wait, maybe I was wrong. Like, maybe I didn't hear right. But then it happens more and more and more and more to the point where you're starting to question, wait, am I, like, what's wrong with me, right? Like, you're questioning your own reality or your sense of, like, understanding. So when you're talking to people on the apps, when you are meeting with them to see if you like each other in person, you need to keep up with these signs, with their body language and what they're telling you. When it comes from arranged marriage perspective, or like the rishta process, or the families introducing each other, I think sometimes as people, I think especially for girls at times, and I can speak from the girl perspective, and from the boys' side, from what I've heard, it can be similar, is the reason why a lot of people are gearing towards the apps is because I can talk to the person at my time, at my pace. When it comes to the rishtas, with the family involvement, it's too much pressure. It's like, like you've met them. What do you think?
Right.
It was like a 20-minute conversation with you guys staring at us while we were talking. Let's calm down. Like, what do you want me to say? He seems cool. Like, I don't know. Like, do I want to marry him? Not in 20 minutes. Like, what do you want from me, right? So the idea here is like there is a familial pressure that happens. And then if the opposite side is putting pressure, right? Or if the opposite side is not allowing the kids to meet and talk and get to know each other at a pace where they both feel comfortable, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, we met 2 times. When can we come over? Or we like him, we want to formally bring a rishta.
So kind of rushing into things. I guess the previous generation, like a majority of them.
If you ask my mom, she's like, "Humne to tumhare baap ki shakal bhi nahi dekhi thi shaadi ki raat tak." I was like, that's wrong, dude. Like, what do you mean? Nanu just picked a dude for you and that was it? Like, how are you okay with that? But again, that's where we have to understand times and, everything has changed. And just because that's what was done at the time doesn't mean it was the proper way to do it, A. B, why do we think we have so many messed up people now?
Right. So
if the guy and the girl didn't talk and didn't see if they had compatibility and chemistry and even liked each other, that often led to abuse.
Yeah, definitely. Times have changed. So again, if I may go with like a follow-up question, what is the red line to seek divorce, separation, right? Again, it can be individual-based scenarios, but also kind of based on what stage of life you're in. But if you're looking at life beyond divorce, like after divorce, like taboo, societal pressure, financial hardships, and if you have kids like single parents, but keeping all this in mind, what should be the red line? Like now there is no point of return. Now this he or she has kind of physically abused or emotionally abused me for a period of certain time, that it's better to live separate than kind of continue in this ongoing I would say struggle or crisis.
Again, it's very hard to say with like a broad brush here, but I will say it's what I've seen when marriages fall apart, honestly, is when both of them stop working on it, A. And the other thing is when one party isn't willing to accept their faults and accept where they went wrong and get the help that they need, right? So there's this saying that goes, once an abuser, always an abuser, right? And I think
Is that true?
Not necessarily, right? And I think in Pakistan, I remember my mom used to say like, "Ek bar haath ut gaya na, phir nahi rukta," right? Which is once the hand is raised, then it doesn't stop, right? Yes and no, it depends, right? So again, going back to what I said earlier, an abuser was once an abusee themselves, right? These are learned behaviors. When a child is born, they don't know. Whatever abuse whatever environment that had been nurtured in, that is what they know. That is what their norm is. So whatever is going on in their homes, whatever is going on in their surroundings, whatever they've seen, that is what they use. It's learned.
So it seems like it's relevant to look at the background or check what type of family they're coming from.
Yeah, look, you have to look into a lot of things, but it's what's learned. So what is learned can be unlearned.
Right.
Right. So if I have certain tools and they don't work for me anymore, I can learn new tools, right? If my hammer doesn't work, I have to go get a new hammer, right? I have to go to Home Depot and get a new hammer. And that's the idea. It's if the person who is doing the abuse, or if the person who is causing a lot of more of the marital strife, right, is willing to acknowledge where their faults are, go and get the therapy that they need, go through marital counseling, learn the tools that they need, work through their own stuff, and then come back into the marriage and accept fault and work towards reunification, it can work. The issue happens is when you got some other stuff in the background, like narcissist, right? Ego. Narcissist is a very overused pop psychology term, but there is a narcissistic personality disorder. Which is primarily prevalent in men. And then there's borderline personality disorder, which is primarily prevalent in women, right? Now, when I have a narcissist, right, they will never admit they're wrong. That is their personality. You can, jump high hell and say, hey, but you hit me. They're gonna say, I only hit you because you did this and this and this. If you hadn't done this, then I would have hit you. So the reason you got hit is actually your fault, not mine.
So the lethal combination is the narcissistic personality and the borderline.
And the borderline and abusive, yeah. So what you have to understand is like behavior can be changed. Personalities later on in age cannot, right? It's a filter there. If you have undiagnosed mental health issues, whether it's bipolar or ADHD at times. ADHD, people don't recognize the big component of ADHD is emotional deregulation. What does that mean? That means that sometimes I react to stimuli in a very intense way, right? So if I put food on the table and the food isn't cold enough, so I flip the table, or it's not warm enough and I flip the table. In that moment, I was angry because I just wanted hot food, but my reaction to that was not, it was a very extreme and intense way, right? And it might not be that I'm a narcissist, it just means that I might have undiagnosed ADHD and I don't know how to regulate it. Right? So, at times it's very easy for us to label somebody as an abuser and to put them off. My thing is the person willing to work and really change? And if that's the case, then that's where I would say, okay, let's try to make this work, right? The caveat is, again, with the personality. And one more thing is sometimes people go to therapy to hear why the other person is wrong. And as a marriage therapist, it can be very frustrating because I can see it happen when I have a couple sitting in front of me and one person is saying, well, this and this is happening, and that I, as a therapist, will validate them and say, well, yeah, you're right, what he's saying is right. You shouldn't have done that. So now he or she's going to hold on to that and weaponize that outside of therapy, right? So the words that I just used, gaslighting, love bombing, right? They will learn those terms and then they will go home and weaponize them and use the same things that we used in therapy against them. Right? And the therapy session then ends up being me being the referee and them just finger pointing and blaming it at each other. To which the partner who's being abused will say, I just don't know what to do anymore. And that's when I'll pull them aside and say, I think you know what you need to do.
Oh, very, very interesting. We hear the stories of abuse, divorces, failed marriages, and these incidents unfortunately are increasing. And hearing all this, going through all these scenarios, the Muslim youth is very discouraged towards marriage, especially when we live in this modern Western society where haram is much easier than halal. And the ease of all this, like living in relationships, the fear of losing like half of your hard-earned assets, right, if you go through a divorce. But despite of all this, how can we still convince our next generation about the positive aspects of marriage despite facing all the challenges?
In a situation like this, there's a lot of fear from the men towards the women, and there's a lot of fear from the women's side towards the men. They have no idea what they're getting in return. A lot of times the men don't know what they're getting in return. And I think that this requires a lot of research prior to getting married. I think that it is society and the way society has set up certain things that has discouraged a lot of people. Like, for example, if you look at the times that were before, it was a very male-dominated society. There was a lot of patriarchy. And as Isaac Newton says, that every action has an equal opposite reaction. And I think that in the name of like feminism and standing up for women's rights, I think there has been such an opposite reaction that has taken place that now if you go to the court systems and so forth, they're just so women favored that now men are thinking like, where do we stand in all this? You understand? There's been an opposite reaction. And as a result, and then there are a lot of men who are like, I just don't even want to get married. And so I think what needs to happen is that, first of all, there has to be a lot of education within our own community, that what are the right ways to handle issues, what are the wrong ways of handling issues. Often you will find that, especially when it comes to like divorces, you'll find men running towards those options that will give them the upper hand. A lot of times you'll find women trying to run towards those options that will give them the upper hand. They don't care about what is right and what is wrong. They care about, I want to come out on top.
What I'm getting out from it.
What am I getting out? And I want to make sure that if I'm going to get out of this marriage, and if I'm going to get something, I want to make sure I get more than him or her. You understand? So I think that the society and the way things have unfolded, unfortunately, it is exactly that has caused a lot of fear and anxiety within a lot of men and women in getting married. That's why part of what I do also is that I always recommend people that go and get, premarital counseling done. Of course, you have to get premarital counseling done because there's a lot of things that come up in premarital counseling that would probably not come out if you just sat there together. And by the way, like when women come to me too, and they would tell me like, my daughter, like I've had a lot of like women come to me and they're like, my daughter's about to get married, or I have fathers that my daughter's about to get married and what do I need to look out for and so forth. Or even, the parents of the boy who will come to me and they're like, what do we need to look out for? And I was like, you have to first look at what was the dynamic of that family. You understand? I mean, if there was abuse happening in that family, then there's a strong chance that those kids have picked up abuse. And they don't realize that it's abuse. They think that it's absolutely normal. It comes with, the family package, but they don't realize that they're doing something that is wrong. So I think there has to be a lot of some research. I always tell men and women that if the husband-to-be is someone who is extremely loyal to their mother, keep your daughters far away from that kind of a man. I'm just being honest.
That's very interesting.
Because what happens is that they put their mothers above their family.
Well, also there's a family system there too, where a lot of times where you have emotionally distant, withdrawn fathers that did not give the mother the love, the respect that she needed. The eldest son or the son of the family ended up being the pseudo husband, right? So he fulfilled the mom's emotional needs, the companionship that she wanted, and went with the son. So now the son is now not only loyal to the mom, but the mom has I can't let go of my son.
Yeah.
So it ends up being like a really big fitna
Is
type
it
of relationship.
mama's boy?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
But there's a mama's boy, and then there's
like a girl also.
but then there's it's a different level of mama's boy, right? It's like my mom's alone. We gotta go. Like we can't. Like mom calls. They're like, my mom's crying. I gotta run. Right? There's a different level. Like I can love my mom and favor my mom. Right? But am I gonna drop everything at the top, at like the drop of a knife to go like, oh my God, my mom needs me. We gotta go. Right? It's like it's an extensive
to point where it's like we're on a date and your mom's with us, right? Like there's a level of like extremity that goes with it.
I think that, and I agree. And what happens is that a lot of our men don't understand the difference between love and respect. One is to respect your mother. There's no question in our deen that respecting your parents is paramount, is extremely important. There is no ands, ifs, and buts when it comes to respecting parents. But what does that respect mean?
Not listening all the time.
Well, respect does not mean
Sometimes it's equated
respect
to
does not
listening.
mean unconditional obedience. You see, they don't know that difference. And that's why you'll see a lot of times that you'll find, I've seen a lot of times mother-in-laws, they would be like, if the daughter-in-law even just disagrees, she not disrespect her, just disagrees, you know, they would say, right away, they attacked her akhlaq just because she simply disagreed. And I go back in our deen, it is absolutely allowed to disagree with each other. The Prophet ﷺ, he's sitting there after the Battle of Badr. He's asking Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, what should we do with the prisoners of war? He's asking Umar radiallahu anh. Umar radiallahu anh disagreed with the Prophet ﷺ. Did the Prophet ﷺ was he offended? No. There was a time where Umar al-Khattab came to the room and he's standing outside the room and he's hearing the Prophet ﷺ and his wives, they're going at it. Like they're talking to each other. The Prophet was talking, they're talking back. But you see in our culture, that many of us we come from, if the wife even responds back, they're like, "Dekho, isne samne jawab diya." You understand? They don't know the line between what is disagreement and what is disrespect. Anything that can make you uncomfortable is classified as a disrespect. And that's where we don't understand those kind of things. So going back to your initial question, that I always tell people, make sure you do your due diligence. Also, if the woman is too attached to her mother too, that's a major problem. So that's why we have to, I tell people, you have to go through premarital counseling. But then additionally, I tell people all the time, you must have a prenup prior to getting married in this day and age. Now, people often will ask me, the very first thing that people ask me is having a prenup Islamically permissible? And I say, absolutely, it is permissible. Well, then we get to the next step, which is often asked, is that, well, a prenup is mostly about a divorce. How do you handle your assets financially if there's a divorce that were to occur? So a lot of times you will have people who will be like, Imam Sahab, abhi to nikah bhi nahi hua hai, and you're talking about a divorce. I mean, they're not even married yet, you're talking about a divorce. Like, how's that setting you up for success? And I always give them the example that, look, when you pay money to insurance companies, you're not paying money to insurance companies because you want to get into an accident or you want to get sick. You give money to these companies because you are protecting yourself, God forbid something happens. You understand? So this is
prevention.
It's a prevention method.
Right.
And so you are protecting yourself in the case that there's a divorce, because when there's a divorce that happens, we find, based on what I've worked with in the past, is there are times where men just want to walk away and not give the huquq and give rights to their wife, fulfill his responsibility by giving child support, anything of that type. They just want to walk away, which is absolutely wrong. And a lot of times you'll find the women, they want to go in court and just take half of everything, or take away the kids and so forth, which is also wrong. So that's why our deen has taught us how to handle all these kind of issues. But all the education has to be given prior to marriage. If you know what you're getting into, and what Sister Madhiya was saying earlier is that this idea of rushing. There are times when people have come to me and they're like, well, the boy's family is rushing. They're asking us over and over again. I'm like, if they are rushing, say no. Now, another greater problem that we do have in our community is, just like it is difficult to find, I'm saying this in both ways, it is difficult to find good guys nowadays, and it's difficult to find good girls nowadays. And so the thing is that now what happens is that because girls are pushing, they're kicking the marriage can down the road. The guys are doing the same thing. They can't find someone who they like a lot, someone who matches their personality. So then what happens after a while, then you just feel like, okay, you know what, let me just settle with anything. So now a lot of times the girls' families will be like, rishta aaya hai, and kafi der ke baad rishta aaya hai, and finally there's something. And I keep on telling them that, look, if it's not good, then you don't feel compelled that I need to get into a marriage.
It's better not to get in.
You rather not get into a marriage than to get into a marriage, and then psychologically you're going to go through challenges, you'll go through emotional challenges, you're going to regret your decision. And then especially the most disturbing things I usually hear from families is, we've been having problems from day one. but we have like 4 or 5 kids. Like,
Right.
why does that even happen to begin with? When you have major problems, before you even bring life into this dunya, husband and wife needs to be on the same page. They have to be getting along. If you can get along, how are you going to sit there and raise your kids?
And some say that lately, especially in the last couple of decades, the expectation has gone too high, both from the
Absolutely
men and
there
women's
is.
side.
Oh, absolutely there is.
Is it wrong to have high expectations?
I believe so. I believe so. I mean, Sister Madhiya can shed light on from a psychological perspective, but I've always read about this, that you can have standard expectations. There's nothing wrong with having expectations, but to have an overwhelming amount of expectations and lofty expectations, because whenever people come, they're like, oh, I have a problem with her, or I have a problem with him. Okay, where's this coming from? Well, I expected her to do this, or I was expecting that she would understand in this way.
So it's better to have more realistic expectations than very optimistic.
Exactly.
And then again, I would like to get your opinion too, but also would like to know if, as Imam mentioned, the early intervention, like the prenup counseling or counseling at very early in the stages of marriage, how much that helps? There kind of a data or kind of a practical experience that you can share that so many marriages can be saved or has been saved?
So like when I do premarital counseling, what it allows people to do is have the tough conversations ahead of time. So we talk about division of labor, we talk about roles of a husband and a wife, we talk about finances, what that looks like, we talk about family systems, what your previous family of origin looks like, we talk about any stuff in the past that happens, and then we talk about expectations and reality versus what you thought was going to happen. So premarital counseling can give you that place to have a safe area where we can have these tough conversations that allow you to kind of navigate some of these questions that you may have. And again, what we don't realize is if I'm going to go and have coffee with some guy that I'm interested in for marriage, I'm going to feel anxious. Because in the back of my head, if it's a rishta, I'm thinking, oh my God, what if mom and dad are probably going to say, I remember this one time I asked a guy, he's in Houston and I was in Dallas, and he's like, would you be willing to move to Houston? And I said, look, dude, if you asked me 3 years ago, for sure. But like now I've established my practice here. Right, I have a business and I can't just leave it. So I wouldn't mind commuting back and forth from Houston, but I think eventually when kids came into the pictures, I wouldn't want to settle down in Dallas. He turned that and he basically went home and told his mom, she just wants a guy from Dallas. She doesn't want me. She just says she's not open to it because she doesn't want to move to Houston.
It has been conveyed in a
So
different
they
way.
turned it and manipulated what I said and and it wasn't even his mom, he told his khala, and his khala called my mom. It's like, nahi, hame nahi pasand ladki, usko to bas Dallas ka hi chahiye. And I was like, bro, my mom's like, tumne kya bola usko? And I was like, Mom, why are you always acting it's me, bro? Like, go ask the guy what he said, right? I said, Mom, this is what I said. She's like, ye to itna bura nahi. I'm like, exactly, dude, right? So the thing is, like, sometimes it's like, I can't even have these conversations with a guy because I'm scared. What is he going to say to his mom, who's then going to tell my mom, and then how am I going to get in trouble for this, right? So the idea is when you're doing it in premarital counseling, there is a third space for you to go to. You have a person who's sitting as a mediator and as a translator sometimes to kind of say, well, this is what they're trying to say, right? Or kind of dig a little bit deeper to kind of give you a full picture of things. On top of that, we don't just talk about the past, but we talk about preventative measures. So we talk about what healthy communication skills look like, what healthy conflict resolution skills look like. I have them do, intimacy and relationship building activities where they go home and, they do these like flashcards or questions that are kind of geared to go into the deeper topics and kind of get you to understand the person a little better, whether it's their thought process, whether it's like what their views are in terms of raising children and, in their future, what their goals are, stuff like that. So it allows you to go in deeper. As far as, what Imam Nadim was saying about the prenups, I 100% agree. I do. Because here's the thing, guys. At the end of the day, we have gotten really good at putting on a mask, and you can do the premarital counseling. You can do, you can take 2 years to get to know the person if you really need to, right? You can meet multiple times. Hell, you can know the family from birth. Like, they could be family friends.
Right.
And then you get married and you start living with the person. And all of this stuff comes out. I cannot tell you how many people have found out about porn addictions, drug addictions, alcohol use post-marriage. I've met some clients that found out within a week of their marriage. Literally, they got married. Within a week, they find out that the partner is addicted to porn. And they go through the therapy and they go through the counseling. They try to make it last, but it doesn't work. In that case, a prenup would be really helpful, right?
So we talked about prenup. How about postnup? Like people who are already into marriage now, they figured out that things might not go the way
that is possible, but here's my thing. Once things are starting to get shaky, people get a little, toxic, right? So now it's not about how can I best benefit myself and the other person. It's how do I win? Like, how do I get what I want?
So yeah, my next question was intended more towards Imam Nadim Bashir, but I would like to ask you. But so when we hear about this domestic abuse, again, violence and all these problems, right? So as soon as you hear about any story about abuse, by default you think that now it's the men that are responsible. Even if a 911 gets call, right, the police comes and the first question would be asked is the men, right? What did you do? And they try to separate that. So again, I kind of try to talk to some of the law enforcement, and that's what the perception is based on how the society kind of was shaped up. So is it like the men in general are guilty until proven innocent otherwise, or it has to be vice versa?
There's multiple reasons for that. I think, what is our definition of abuse? Right? So traditionally it's if the man hits the wife, right? And what happens if the wife launches herself at the husband, right? And he just like pushes her away as self-defense, but now she has the wounds, right? If the police comes and he sees that he's fine, right? But then she's over here and she has like a bruise from where she fell, who's he gonna take? The man, right? So what we gotta understand is the wounds from an emotional abuse attack or financial abuse attack or a spiritual abuse is not easily shown, right?
And can never be proved.
Exactly. So it's the same way if like I have a child that I'm seeing in therapy and I call CPS, they're gonna go in and they're gonna be like, well, there's no neglect. The child is fed, they go to school, they're well kept. There's no marks or signs of like physical harm here. They'll leave the kid there. And then the parents continue their torture, right? And there's a difference there because what they're looking for is a sign, but what they don't see is that there's something going on underneath. How's the child reacting, or how's the wife and husband reacting to each other?
So the background is most likely ignored.
Yeah, so when a cop comes in, right, the issue is that there's also underreporting, and I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, but the reality is men underreport abuse for this reason. Right? Because they're not going to be taken seriously, A. B, societally, men don't get abused, right? So the idea is if I do report that my wife hit me, am I weak? It attacks your masculinity to a certain extent too. Thirdly, and Imam Nadim alluded to it as well, it's like if I do call the police, they're going to favor the wife and my children will be taken away from me. So the idea here is, right, I do see where, and it is true that there are some, cards stacked against men, right? And the issue is that due to that, men sometimes don't get the help that they need. They don't get the resources that they need. If you look at the domestic violence shelters, right, just look in the DFW Metroplex, majority of them are geared towards women. I know maybe one, there's like the family place and maybe the Salvation Army in downtown that have a men's shelter. Outside of that, we don't, right? That's the sad part, is that if a woman is coming to me and she's getting abused, I can give her the shelter's number, I can get her children out, I can get the cops to hold him off while they go get the kids, get whatever they need, get her to a safe place, get her to safety. I don't have the same resources at hand for when it comes to my male clients. And that is a sad thing that we're looking at in society, right? What we see is the statistics on men is perpetrators, men who are being abused is about 20%, women is 80%. And again, that is a very skewed and very biased data or statistic that we have because men underreport. And then, if I can take it a step further, if you look at their research on like LGBTQ marriages and like if you look on like for example, gay relationships where it's men on men, if a male is perpetrating on a male and the cops are called, they don't take one away. They're just like, work it out, right? That's it. Like they don't take them seriously because it's like, you're a dude, right? Fight him. Like, what are you doing, right? And they don't understand that even if it is, like Imam Nadim was saying, even if it's a guy, you guys are different, right? A doctor versus an engineer have different skill sets, right? So somebody, even in males, may be more physically dominant, maybe more, psychologically cunning than the other person. So again, it's not just within men versus women, it's just with men in general. For whatever reason, we don't think men can get hurt. And it's not just DV, it goes throughout mental health. Women tend to commit suicide more or attempt suicide more. Men are more likely to succeed. Do you know why? Men use more lethal weapons, right? Men are more likely to be the ones that do the gunshot to the head or, hang themselves. Women do the pills or cutting. And they're
The more aggressive way. Right?
Yeah.
More aggressive way.
It's more like when men decide they're done, they are done. Yeah. That's it. Right? Men are less likely to get, mental health therapy. Why? Because they've never been taught to talk and express themselves. Men are only taught that anger and happiness. Those are the two emotions that are okay for them. Everything else is not allowed.
Men usually look at it as more weakness.
Talking about my feelings,
help,
expressing, crying, all of these emotions that we talk about is weakness, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But then hold on, because this is where I'm going to give you the caveat is, what do you do when you have a narcissist who's playing, the vulnerable narcissist? Yeah. Right? Because there are men who are very entwined with their emotions, but it's only when they need to weaponize it, right? So they'll cry, they'll tell you their sob story, they will tell you everything and everyone that's hurt them, but it is to use that information to get you to feel empathy for them so that they can continue that torture.
So it's like a sincerity, insincerity kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a mask.
Even like when it comes to like general matters, how can you tell someone is sincere versus someone who's not sincere? Only Allah knows their intention.
Yeah.
It could be it's a similar situation that it could be a man who is being abused, and a lot of times we always talk about domestic violence, physical abuse. Yes, and as I said earlier, men are, when it comes to physicality, Allah has given more to the men. They do more of those kind of difficult things. And so when they use that the wrong way, of course that's wrong. You don't see many cases where women are committing domestic violence. I mean, I remember there was one brother who came to my office. He was actually crying, telling me that his wife makes him sleep on the floor.
No, they do, Imam Nadim. There's a lot of scratching, hair pulling. They do hit, and they hit with the intention of knowing that if the man hits back, he's going to get in trouble.
Yes.
Right?
So it's a psychological abuse. It's like basically, let me do what I need to do to set him up for failure. Now, just like a long time ago and happens till today overseas, the way a lot of times men, they threaten their wives like, "Ye nahi kiya to talaq de dunga." First of all, I can't stand this, because there's no place in our deen that says that this is allowed. I can't stand when men say, if you don't do this. So a lot of times the girl, and especially overseas, this happens more overseas, where the girl, in order to protect the dignity and the reputation of her family, her parents, the parents will keep on telling her, just manage the abuse, take it in, just learn how to, but I mean, it's not right. But the man is threatening her over and over again. And here you'll see that you don't find a lot of times now men saying, unless he knows that she has nowhere to go, she has no financial backing. But then you'll see that now in this day and age, you'll see women giving those kind of more threats, that because she knows that the law is on her side, so let me do something, because then I can go and I can share and fabricate any story in a court, and I'll take away the kids from you, I'll take half of all your assets. So now the guy is thinking to himself that, what have I got myself into? I don't want to put myself in a position where I have trapped myself. And that's why honestly in a prenup, you get to save yourself because of all that.
Right. Yeah, so after hearing all this conversation, again, I'm kind of more optimistic person, right? So would still like to know that do perfect marriages exist? And the reason why I ask this question is growing up, you hear all these fairy tales. Bollywood has added spices over decades, so they set the bar, the expectation so high. But when the reality actually hits, marriage, and as you said, it can be revealed at any time, you won't realize that I didn't sign up for this. So do real marriages still exist, or?
I mean, marriage, I don't believe in a perfect marriage, because we don't find, even in the case of Prophet ﷺ, that he had a perfect marriage. Like, there was a time where he was separated from his wives also for like a month. Now, for whatever reason, I mean, there's a lot of speculation. But the thing is that there is no such thing called a perfect marriage. Yes, of course, the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, they respected the Prophet ﷺ. And even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the wives of the Prophet ﷺ very explicitly that if you are not going to be respectful towards him, and you're going to put him in difficult situations, then we will replace you with someone else. Okay, this is mentioned. So the point is that I don't believe in a perfect marriage, because not everyone has been created equally. Everyone has different personalities, different philosophies. And I say this I've conducted so many nikahs, and I say this all the time. For example, two people in the same marriage, they might deal with depression or they might deal with sadness in two different ways. But that is where you need to learn about each other. Like one person could feel like, the man could feel like, you know what? The woman needs care. The woman needs to be loved. So she's going through a difficult situation. Let me go and put my arm around her. Let me try to console her. But she has this kind of personality that when I'm going through difficulty, I need to be left all alone for a moment. Now the man may see that as a disrespect, but the wife is saying that this is just my boundary. This is how I deal with this. So he needs to learn that this is how the man needs to respect those kind of boundaries. Same thing with the wife. If she knows that this is how the husband is dealing with this, sometimes he needs to be left all alone. And as Sister Madhiya said, men, a lot of times in families, they may not resort to violence, especially because of the laws and the way they're set up and they're so harsh. But you'll find in most marriages, and this is irrespective of religion and culture, you'll find men often, when they are going through difficulties in their marriage, they will just simply disconnect. They will absolutely disconnect, because every man in a marriage, he's looking for respect. Now, if he does not get that respect from his home, he will go somewhere else to look for that respect. Now, it could be his friends who are giving him that respect. So now he's going to feel the need that I need to be more around my friends because they show me respect. My kids don't show me respect. My wife doesn't show me respect. You understand? And then same thing with love. The wife is looking for love. That I need my husband to show me that love, whether it's doing things for me, whether it's understanding me, because love is not just about giving flowers. Love is not just about doing something for her and so forth. Love is about that when she's going through her difficult times, you are there as a support for her. No matter what the situation is, I value you, I respect you. So that is what that love and respect is. It's a give and take. So once again, I feel like that there's no such thing called a perfect marriage. I feel like that, and I say this often in my nikahs that I conduct, is the problem is not that we have problems. The problem is we don't know how to solve our problems. That is what the problem is. Okay? There's always going to be issues in life. Today you have, especially with politics, okay, there's been a change in administration. Some people are going to take that up.
Careful. In Texas, be careful.
No, I'm just saying that some people are going to have a problem with that, Some people are going to have a problem with their finances. There's always going to be problems everywhere in life, you understand? You're never going to find complete happiness in anything in life. But if you know how to handle those emotions, if you know how to handle those issues, then your life becomes a whole lot more easier. Because even in the case of the Prophet ﷺ, no one can say that he had a perfect life, but he knew how to channel those emotions. He knew how to overcome those challenges. So once again, when people say, why do I have problems? I don't think that's a problem. That's part of life. If someone said, I want a life with no problems, then I would tell them you have to wait for Jannah, because that is the place where you have no problems. Dunya is called dunya because you're going to have problems.
You have to go through problems.
Yes, you have to go through some certain challenges.
Yeah.
But dunya is going to be filled with problems. That's not the problem. The problem is we don't know how to solve our problems. So that's the key issue.
Yeah, before I come to you for the last question, again, with all these conflicts, with all the divorces and all the problems that we see in the society, right? I think some who suffer silently are the children, or who have actually witnessed these abuses firsthand, or who are actually the part of all these situations before. So as you mentioned, someone who is coming from a broken family, he tend to be the abuser later on when he grows up or gets married. So what can be done for the children?
It's really sad, unfortunately, because the kids do get affected the most. And a lot of times what we see is, you think it stops once the parents get separated or divorced. Like, let's say they do decide to move
Actually,
away.
it gets worse after that.
It gets worse because whoever the abuser is, whether it's the man or the woman, will then try to manipulate, isolate, and alienate the children from the other person.
Because the challenge with a single parent is upbringing, right? So let's say that...
even when it is upbringing, right? So I can get divorced, right? And have my partner or my former partner, right? But we have an understanding that, I always say just because the divorce caused your marriage to end, it didn't cause the family to finish, right? So yes, you have terminated that role, or you've terminated that job, right, of husband and wife.
You've terminated the contract, basically, yeah.
But at the same time, you are still going to be the mother and father of these children forever. And because of that, these children are always going to bind you. So it's co-parenting. We didn't make it as husband and wife, but we got to make it as mom and dad, right? And what it is have an understanding of whatever our beef was, that doesn't get shown to the children, right? The issue is when you're dealing with abuse, that power and control is still, that want for that is still going to be there. So how do I gain power? How do I still inflict damage over you if I'm no longer your husband or your wife? I take your children away. I remove them from you. I make them hate you. I make them say these terrible things to make you feel like, oh my God, what have I done? And unfortunately, when it is the woman is the abuser, men withdraw. They just walk away from the children's life because what should I do? They come and they tell me they hate me. They just want their mom. Well, if they want their mom, just let them go to their mom. I can't take this anymore, and they walk away. And women often will fight till as long as they can until their finances are depleted, or the kids get, to become teenagers and they become a lot more aggressive and harder to handle and discipline. And then they just are like, okay, you know what, go stay with your dad if you want to. And usually when that happens is the kids eventually, because once that person is out of the picture, the abuse then turns to the children. And then they realize what mom went through or what dad went through, and then they kind of go back. But it's a long and painful road. So unfortunately or fortunately with the children, I always say the moment you realize these things are happening in the home, get them to therapy, get them to counseling, put them in homes or put them around people that they can see a healthy marriage. So, I see a lot of people where I'm like, hey, you guys are doing this in your marriage, please have the children at the uncle's house or nani nana's house or dadi dada's house. They need to see what a healthy relationship looks like, because they need to have an idea of, hey, that's a marriage, but this is also a marriage, right? It's a choice.
Right. Right.
And that's the biggest thing is exposure.
Very important to give the positive impression. So when they grow up, they can be normal human beings.
Well, yeah, and children are sponges, right? They're going to soak up whatever you put around them. So if you see that they're soaking up this, put them around this too. Let them see that, right? If they're going through trauma, or if they've seen, daddy hit mommy, or mommy say these really mean things, or mommy threw a vase at daddy's head, right? If they saw that, they need to know whether mommy and daddy did that, yes, but mommy and daddy can be wrong too.
In our mediation cases that we've dealt with, especially when it comes to divorces, I have to constantly remind the parents that, look, you're not done being mom and dad. After this, if you both can get along and respect each other, then it's going to bode well for your kids. And so we have to constantly tell them that don't talk about each other in society. Don't put each other down. Don't cause any kind of fitna in society. We have to constantly remind them, because they just don't walk away from a marriage and that is it. Then they will create stories about each other in society. And then those stories become rumors. And then, it's uncles, and there's a lot of uncles and aunties, unfortunately, that they like to take those stories.
And I think that we have this, again, we are very much we need to put everyone in the box, right? So when a divorce is happening or a separation happening, nobody ever says, hey, we just weren't good for each other. There always has to be a bad guy, right? We have to make one the villain and one the hero, right? Because of that, we cause ourselves to be put into this dichotomy, which means we have to label the other person as the villain, right? It didn't work out because they stopped trying, or they did this and they did that. But the reality is that there is no perfect marriage, because there is no perfect people, right? And until you can admit that you also can be at fault, we all say tali do haath se bachti hai na. So even if you're being abused, there is some fault in there too. It's you allowed your boundaries to be crossed, right? You didn't recognize the signs. You were kind of gaslit into these things, and now we have to work our way out of it, right? So you can sit there and say, these are my faults, and when I do get married again, or if I start to look for a partner again, I need to make sure that I work through this so that I don't bring this into my new relationship, right? So again, like you said, life is trials and tribulations. You either come out a victim or a survivor. A victim will stay in that mentality of look what happened to me, and blame everyone. A survivor will say, this happened to me, it sucked, but look how I worked through it, and look how I'm better now. Right?
Yeah, eventually what matters is what you ended.
What you learned from it, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And last question to you, Imam Nadim Bashir, is I heard a very novel concept, IAMS, right? This is the first time I'm hearing probably It's kind of bringing the religion and trying to arbitrate and see what best comes out for the couples. Can you tell us a little bit more about it so people can get benefited? And also, is it only for Muslims or is it also for non-Muslims to benefit?
To answer the second question, actually, it's in the name Islamic Arbitration and Mediation. So I think that makes it very clear. The idea behind this was that as an imam, I was observing a lot of divorces that were taking place in the community. I saw a lot of people who were engaging in many disputes, whether it was financial disputes, whether it was disputes related to, like, for example, like inheritance, a division of inheritance in the family. We're just talking about in disputes in general. I met with another brother. I've got to know him since 2017. His name is Brother Larry Anthony. His Muslim name is Yunus. He's been a Muslim, mashallah, for 20 years plus. And so I knew, he had told me and shared with me that he was doing some kind of work. I had reached out to him just trying to consult with him because I had reached out to other imams. No one knew exactly how to handle these kind of issues in the community strictly from an Islamic perspective as well as a legal perspective. I talked to him and we got this going, alhamdulillah, like back in 2021.
So it's been on for 4 years plus?
So we got, the perception was created, the idea was created in 2021. We actually started taking in cases, I would say in 2022. And the idea is that we want to make sure that no one is shortchanged. We want to make sure that the husband fulfills his responsibility. The Quran makes it very clear, فَإِمْسَاكٌ بِمَعْرُوفٍ أَوْ تَسْرِيحٌ بِإِحْسَانٍ. If you want to walk away from your marriage, either you stay in the marriage the right way, or you want to walk away, do it the right way. The Quran makes it very clear. So a lot of times we saw men abusing the system, we saw women abusing the system. And not only that, but then when they would go down the legal route and they would get attorneys involved, we're talking about taking a major financial hit. So with all this in mind, the idea was to provide and facilitate the community with an option to come to the table to handle things according to the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, a way that we all should conform to. And not only that, but legally it can be taken care of also. We're not a legal entity, so I make that very clear. We're not attorneys, but we are mediators. We have done our training of arbitration, so we are arbitrators. And the difference between mediation and arbitration is that both of them have somewhat of a binding element to it. Arbitration has more of a binding element to it. I remember when I was taking my arbitration training, she was telling us that you are like judges, but without the gravel and without the code, basically. But if two parties come to you and they agree to arbitrate, then whatever our decision is or the award that we mention, our decision is binding, even in a court. They cannot go into court and get it overturned unless they have to prove some kind of malicious intent or wrongdoing on our part. Mediation, basically, both parties are in the position of power. They come, they sit down, they both have to agree to mediate, and they are able to come to some kind of a resolution. So, alhamdulillah, this also saves them a lot of money down the road. And we usually do recommend for people to go to mediation because when they go down the road and they're getting attorneys involved and they are spending like $30,000, $50,000, $100,000. There was a case that I heard about $300,000 in attorney fees. I'm thinking to myself that you can actually handle this thing in a more peaceful way, and you can probably save that money for your kids down the road.
Not only that, but attorneys egg them on.
Yes,
they
exactly.
do. They egg them on against each other.
Yes, like there are stories I've heard of where attorneys from both sides, they're meeting over lunch and they're talking to each other, whereas at the table they're at each other's throats. So the point is that we started this. Unfortunately, the Muslim community is not still fully aware of this. Like there are cases and times where people have called us and they kept on calling mediation meditation. And it really shows you the lack of awareness in the Muslim community of what mediation and arbitration is. In Arabic, mediation is as-sulh. This is something that's mentioned in the Quran. Even in the context of marriage, Allah says that when there is a nushuz, we were talking about earlier from the perspective of the wife, but even when there is from the perspective of the husband, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ. If there's disobedience or there's a major conflict from either side, Allah says, as-sulhu khair. As-sulh is mediation. Yeah,
Right.
sulah, exactly what we say in Urdu, right? But that is what mediation is. And the Arabic term for arbitration is tahkim. There's a person who's in position of authority. He does tahkim. Tahkim means applying a certain rule on a certain matter. This is what mediation arbitration is. And by the way, what's beautiful about this country, I have to say, is that, and something that you don't find in other countries, that the court dockets are so backed up. They are telling people, the judges are telling people, go to your faith community, go to a mediator within your faith community and see if this is something that you can mediate out of court. By the way, the Jewish community, they have a full system set up. I mean, places where there is a very dense Jewish population, they have these systems set up already. There's a lot of even Christian communities, they have these systems set up. Within our Muslim communities, we don't have this. And so with this in mind, we started this, and alhamdulillah, we've helped a lot of people come to the table. There's a lot of misunderstandings often when we talk about what are the rights of the husband and what are the rights of the wife. And we have to really make that very clear, that no, this is not your right, or this is your right. There's a lot of misunderstandings, both from the husband's perspective or the wife's perspective, and we have to make that very clear. So we do multiple different types of mediation or arbitration, and alhamdulillah, it has benefited a lot of people. Many people are coming to know about it. At the end of the day, we're not police officers, we're not the law enforcement, and we cannot force anyone to come to the table. There are many cases where the husband wants to come to the table, the wife does not. Sometimes the wife wants to come and the husband does not. But we always try to tell everyone that this is perhaps the best option for you. Now, of course, if there's a lot of complexities to it, then we would say, okay, go and hire an attorney. I mean, there are times when we have told people, go and hire an attorney if there's some major complexities. So, alhamdulillah, we got this started, and and what we generally, from a financial perspective, what we generally charge is a fraction of what attorneys generally charge, because we understand that as you are going through this very difficult time in your life, finances should not be the major burden on your mind. We try to bring that element also. Of course, I mean, some people, they opt for it, some people do not opt for it, and so we leave it to them, and if they want to, inshallah, they can.
No, I think it's a great idea. So I think people definitely, at least fortunately, who are going through this tough situation should at least explore and see and hear it out. I wish you all the best, and I think we'll also share the link in the description and the video. Thank you, both of you, for your time, and again, it's a counseling session for me, more than an episode. I would take a lot of positive things from here, and definitely would like to come up with more interesting and engaging content. So it definitely benefit our viewers, especially for the Muslim population in particular, and general population also. So thank you again. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.